Our society is obsessed with money. The stock market was at an all-time high earlier this year. We got very excited about it. And then suddenly, all the gains of the year disappeared. And they disappeared because of a tremendous amount of fear that America has over, well, we can blame it on the coronavirus, but really nobody cares about the coronavirus. They care about the fact that they might be losing money, and so they begin to sell their stocks out of fear that the stock market will go down. And then the stock market actually goes down. But it's going down because of fear, not fear of disease, but fear of money. And so everybody is looking at the stock market. And by the way, the only people that have lost money in the stock market so far are those that have sold stocks. And the crazy thing about the stock market is that every time there's a sale, somebody wins and somebody loses. You have the 50% chance of being wrong every time you do something. Now, granted, I'm not saying, hey, don't have 401ks, don't invest. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that most of the whole idea behind the stock market and investing and stuff like that was to do good with your money, not to try to do good for yourself. But often when it comes to money, all we care about is doing for ourselves. And you know what we're all going to find out is that you can't take it with you. There's a great picture out there running around the internet of a U-Haul, of a hearse pulling a U-Haul, because there's an old preacher saying that I've never seen a U-Haul being pulled by a hearse, so now we have that picture. But still, I don't care what you saw, you're not going to take it with you. But we're obsessed with money. It's how we keep score. And perhaps we should be concerned about money a little bit. After all, the reason we work is for money. The reason, and often the money, how we spend it is reflected on what we believe, what we want. Sometimes people buy a car, not so much because they need transportation, but because it makes them happy, or it's a symbol to others of who they are or who they believe to be. I know that real estate agents need to have really nice cars to show people their stuff, because the real estate stuff, because they believe that if they have a ratty car, if you will, that they'll look like they're unsuccessful, and nobody wants to buy real estate for an unsuccessful person. I'm not sure, but I think that started with a car dealer making that statement. Now, in Jesus' day, things were not much different. They didn't have a lot of money. They didn't have a lot of possessions. They didn't have a Walmart to go buy whatever you wanted to from, but money was still an important part of their life, or at least the resources that we would consider financial. And so Jesus spoke a lot about these finances, about these resources, because it got to the heart of who people are. We hear the story about the rich young ruler. He was a very religious man, had everything he wanted. He was at the top of his game, if you will. And yet, he felt he didn't have what he needed for eternal life. And so Jesus told him, give away everything you have. It's weighing you down. Come follow me. Why didn't the rich young ruler do that? Because even though he had an abundance and he had more than he needed, he was afraid that it was not going to be enough. He was not trusting in God. Clearly, our approach to money has to be brought in line with God's teachings, bringing our heart in line with Jesus, or we're not going to be able to enjoy the abundant life that God has for us. The book of Ecclesiastes is filled with laments about how you can have everything and still have nothing. First thing we need to understand our relationship with money and finance, all this stuff, is that God owns everything. In Genesis, we begin by reading that God saw all that He had made, and it was very good. It was very good. In Psalms it says, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. God made everything and it all belongs to Him. And to Job, God said, who has a claim against me that I must pay? Everything under heaven belongs to me. Every good and perfect gift, we read in James, is from above, coming down from the Father of heavenly lights. It doesn't belong to us, it belongs to God. And we are stewards of everything He's given us. One of the things about Baptist Temple and all this property and everything around us is that it belongs to God. And therefore we need to use it to God's glory, to build a kingdom to God's purposes. And we have done that. And it's such a blessing to us. God has continually blessed us because we have opened up our resources to the kingdom. On the other hand, there's a lot of churches in our area that are declining, and they're falling to pieces and they're going to dust because the people in that church believe they actually own it, and they give permission or don't give permission to what's going to happen there. I believe that more than anyone else, or at least as much as we can, Baptist Temple believes that the resources that are here belong to God. But you know, our personal resources also belong to Him. I know that it's your name on the title of that car next to the banks. And it's we own our homes and that sort of stuff, but do we really own our homes? Some people here rent, but even though, you know, I own the home and it's got my name on the title next to the banks, I have to pay Bexar County to live on my property. Can you believe that? They think they think I have to pay them rent. And I agree with them, because if I don't pay them their rent, or property taxes as they call it, they're going to take me off my property. But you know, what we don't realize is that they're next to our name on the title, next to the bank's name, and next to Bexar County. God should be the name above everything. Our homes, everything we own belongs to God. He gave it to us. Clearly, the Bible's telling us that. You know, and God went out of His way to show us, to make this lesson known to us. During the time that the Israelites were leaving Egypt, God was telling them that He'd take care of them. You know, the Israelites were slaves in Egypt. You know that, right? They didn't even own themselves. And yet they were afraid to leave because they believed that the Egyptians were feeding them. And so they talk about their honeydews and their melons and their cucumbers and all this wonderful stuff they got out of Egypt. So God said, I will feed you. Every morning there's going to be this stuff on the ground called manna. I need you to gather it up, knead it, make it into bread, and that's going to be your food every day. And every day, and He told them, don't hoard it, because I know if there was going to be a shortage of manna, we'd run out there to the HEB and we would take all the manna off the shelf, right? We would bring garbage cans and we would pump that manna into our garbage cans. There's a shortage. You know I'm not talking about manna, right? I'm talking about fuel and all the things that we hoard in the times of an emergency. God gave them manna every day so that they would know that God is the one that provides for us. More than that, later on Jesus would pray or teach us to pray, give us this day our daily bread. That's not good budgeting, is it? But it is good theology. It is good belief. It is strong that we believe that God provides for us daily, and He is the source of all that we have. I found out today that there's plenty of hand sanitizer in Corsicana, in case you need to run out there and get some. You know, we need to learn that lesson today, that our fortunes and our future does not lie with the stock market, whether it goes up or down. You know, in a world, in our country that was suffering from so many things that we need to fix. When Clinton ran for president, "It's the economy, stupid," was his slogan. It's the economy, stupid. It always seems to be the economy, no matter what else is going on. And often, if a president, he beat Bush. We've always seemed to have two-term presidents, but Bush got beaten. Why? Because it's the economy. Carter got beaten from a second term. Why? Because it was the economy. We are obsessed with money, and we need to be obsessed with God. So the cure for greed, the cure for obsessive with money, is to let it go. That's what Jesus told the rich young ruler. You're not going to be happy as long as you're obsessed with your money, so you got to let it all go. You see, because when we're generous with our money, we demonstrate that God has a priority in our life. It tells in the Bible that the purpose of tithing is to teach you to always put God first in your life. They had a celebration in Israel where they would bring in the first fruits. I don't know. I'm a gardener. So when that first tomato comes on my plant, sometimes I think of it as what's coming. Well, I'm supposed to think of it as what's coming. But sometimes there's a fear, isn't it? We got one tomato. What if that's the only tomato I'm going to get? So trust in God showed that you would give Him the first fruits. And trust Him that He's going to give you more. It reminds me that God gave everything to me. It tells us again in Deuteronomy, "You shall remember the Lord your God, for He is the one who gives you the power to have wealth." When you drag yourself up every morning to go to work, like I did today, I don't know about you, but I had to get up an hour earlier. Seriously. When I looked at my watch, it was an hour earlier. I rejoice in the fact that I was able to get up, that I had a job to go to, that I'm being compensated, and then, that I'm going to be able to buy hand sanitizer if it ever comes back on the shelves. By giving to God, I express my gratitude. Each one is to bring a gift as he is able in proportion to the blessings that God has given to him. I find it interesting that in order for me to show how successful I am, I'm going to buy a car that's equivalent to my wealth so everybody can see it. And that's not true, right? I'm going to borrow some money and I'm going to buy a car a little bit above my wealth. So I want you to know, if you're driving a nice fancy car, that's good. God blessed you and I'm happy for you. But I'm going to subtract a little bit from that car and assume that you borrowed to get a better car than you can, because that's the human nature, that's the way we are. But God is telling us here, in order for us to show our wealth, we need to bring the tithe so that people would see. And back in those days, today, our tithe, we write a check, or sometimes it just gets taken automatically out of a bank account. Back then, you had to come in with wheelbarrows, to bring your fruit and your meat and all this stuff, and you dump it there at the steps of the temple. Probably not. They probably had a side entrance when you make deliveries. But it was actually physical. So can you imagine that? Taking that ink that you put on the check and multiple, and it represents what you brought in. It's also an antidote for our pride. Command those who are rich, it tells in the Bible, not to be arrogant, nor put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for your enjoyment. There was one time in my life I was going to be rich. I was working for a startup company, and I got some stock options. And, they were telling us stories of Walmart and how truck drivers were millionaires now because they got the Walmart stock early. And all these stories. Well, I don't need to tell you it didn't happen. But what did happen is that I was able to focus on the fact that God has taken care of me, that He has given me these provisions. And by the way, I wasn't really going to be rich. At best, it was probably going to pay off my house. Rich is a relative term. And I know my bosses would have been that kind of rich, but I would have been just pay off my house rich. But it was more important to me, I think, than to have this money than to have God. Because I tell you, that rich young ruler, that story is repeated over and over and over again. A person who sold their soul to become rich, made compromises, and completely forgot God because they think they're self-sufficient. And let me tell you right now, those people who put their reliance on their wealth, they're the ones that are worried over the stock market crash because they had their heart in their wealth. If you have your heart in God, you realize He's going to provide for you somehow, some way, but He will provide. Whether it is through your 401k or some other means, He will provide. The most important thing about being generous with our funds is that where your treasure is, there your heart will be. We're told, put your money where your mouth is. Right? You've heard that saying. That saying is wrong. We think that we give to the things we love. But the opposite is true. We love the things we give to. We love the things we give to. So if you don't have any money in the stock market whatsoever, you don't care. So what? It's just some numbers on the screen. But if you're invested, suddenly you care about what's going on. If you own stock in Coca-Cola, you're probably looking at every day. Hey, well, how's my Coca-Cola stock doing? Wherever we put our money is where our heart is going to be. So the Bible gives us some principles for giving. That word tithe, it just means tenth. And I know that there's a lot of arguments in the church today as to whether we're supposed to tithe or give a tenth and all that stuff, and that the church really teaches generosity. Well, that is true, but the word tithe is not the tithe doesn't come from the law. It comes before the law. Long before the law was given by Moses, we had the principle of tithe was there, and that Abraham gave a tithe of everything to Melchizedek, this unusual priest, or we don't know his origins, we don't know where he came from, but we do know that he represented the holy God, and that Abraham gave him a tithe as a tribute, as a form of thanksgiving for everything that Abraham had. So Jesus clarified a few things for us. Jesus taught that we should be generous, and there's a lot of good reasons to give: tax deductions, publicity, goodwill of the community, that sort of stuff. However, the most important thing we do with our gifts is out of devotion to God. That should be the primary and maybe even the only reason for giving. Let the other things be kind of residual. Jesus taught that we should give sacrificially. He told the story of a poor widow. She gave a couple of pennies. And it was giving was public. People would line up and they would give, and they had this thing called a trumpet. When you put the coins, it would make a little noise as the coins swirled and went into the thing. A big show. You can imagine how gratifying it is that you're giving something, you're getting this little sound, It's not quite ka-ching, but, And so the coins made a different sound. So the nice coins of gold and silver, they'd clink, 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 clink. She put in a couple of pennies, they're probably clunk. But Jesus celebrated her. She said she gave more than everybody else because she gave everything she had. And so Jesus celebrated that. He also celebrated a very generous gift. In the Gospel of Mark, that's followed immediately by the woman who gave this very expensive jar of perfume and anointed Jesus' feet with it. So it's not that everybody gives sacrificially. And that's what he's celebrating, sacrificial giving. And it's the act of devotion that was being celebrated, not the amount of money. Because we know that our Lord can take just a little bit and multiply it. He took some loaves and some fish and fed 5,000 people. With one lunch, he fed 5,000 people. Paul, later on in the epistles, would clarify giving, and he said that we should be ready for when he came, that the collection would be taken when he came, and that we should give proportionately. Giving is above all an act of worship. It's an act of surrender. If money is that important to our society, then giving is an act of total devotion. For many people, the most important thing they have is money, when the most important thing they should have is God. And so I know when you give to the church, you're actually giving to God, and that's how you should think about it. Together, we figure out how to use the money to continue God's mission on earth, that great commission that He gave us to make disciples. But most importantly, we are giving it as an act of devotion to God. Not as a practical matter, because it needs to be more than that. We need to change our hearts and our minds as to how we do things in terms of giving. Because by giving, we are going to break the bonds that, the bondage that we're in to our finances. And folks, I know that we worry about our finances. Maybe some of you are beyond worrying about your finances, and God blessed you tremendously, and that's wonderful. It's certainly nothing to be ashamed of. But you know, the people who are worried about their finances, it doesn't matter how much they have. They worry that it's never going to be enough. Can you imagine that? One of the worries that we have now as seniors, and by the way, I'm a senior now, thank you. One of the worries that we have as seniors is that we worked hard, we got our pension, we saved our money, we got our 401ks, and now we might live too long. Can you imagine that? Worrying that you're going to live too long? And it's a silly worry. It is, because if I were your doctor, I said, look, you might live another 10 years, but if you don't have enough money, we can fix that. How much money do you have? And we'll set up a cutoff date. We'll cut off your medication or something. So it is silly. Our life is worth so much more to us than our money. So remember that. Remember that when you start worrying about money. What are you really worried about? Is God going to take care of you? He is. There's a pastor, I forget his name, but he's famous. He got arrested and convicted under the RICO Act for conspiracy, as if he was in the mafia, which is what organized crime was that was act, for protesting at abortion clinics. He was, he was a leader and an organizer. Randy Alcorn, I believe. He was an organizer, so they figured that he was a ringleader, and so they gave him a heavy sentence, but mainly a fine. He was to pay this huge fine that he could never pay. So he discovered that he could never own a home. He could never make money. Any money that he earned would go to pay off this stuff. So the irony of it is that the money that he would have to pay would go to the abortion clinics. What a horrible irony. So he decided that he would never have money again. What? And yet he is just as comfortable as he ever was. He writes books, and he's very good with his book writing, but the royalties for his books never go to him. They go to ministries. And he lives in a parsonage. And people help him, feed him, and take care of him. The kingdom of God at work and freeing this man from money. And I got to tell you, folks, even though I see it works for him, we're so afraid of that, aren't we? Some of you are thinking, yeah, but no. I'm not suggesting we do that, but I am showing you that this man is free from money. And generosity is the antidote for our fear and our greed. And it's a demonstration, our belief that God will take care of us. Some principles about giving, that giving should be proportionate according to your income. It should be sacrificial. It needs to cost you something, and it should be systematic. Not just every once in a while that comes to whim, every week, every month, whatever systematic means to you.
Baptist Temple is part of a family of churches and service organizations sharing a large strategic campus in San Antonio, Texas, to serve the spiritual and physical needs of our community.